The sirens were getting louder. I stood there in my own backyard, spatula still in my hand, watching 3 police cars pull into my driveway. My heart was pounding as I looked at the perfectly normal barbecue behind me, burgers sizzling on the grill, friends laughing around the picnic table, the lake sparkling peacefully in the evening sun. Then I saw her. Karen was standing at the edge of my property with that smug smile on her face, arms crossed, clipboard clutched against her chest like a weapon. She had actually done it. She had called 911 on me for having a barbecue at my own lake cabin. The lead officer walked toward me, his hand resting on his radio. "Sir, we received a complaint about illegal activities on this property." That was the moment I realized this war had just begun. But what Karen did not know was that, in exactly 3 minutes, I was about to discover something that would end her reign of terror forever. After 15 years of grinding through corporate life in the city, I finally did it. I bought my dream lake cabin. Every penny of overtime, every weekend I worked instead of relaxing, every vacation I skipped to save money had led to this moment. Standing on the dock of my own piece of paradise, watching the morning mist rise off Crystal Lake. The cabin was not much to look at from the outside. A modest 2-bedroom structure with weathered cedar siding and a green metal roof. But it sat on nearly an acre of pristine lakefront property, surrounded by towering pine trees that had been growing here longer than I had been alive. The moment I first saw it, I knew this was home. The first few weeks were everything I had dreamed about and more. I would wake up to the sound of loons calling across the water. My morning coffee tasted better when I drank it on the dock, watching the sunrise paint the lake in shades of gold and pink. In the evenings, I would fire up my old charcoal grill and cook dinner while listening to the gentle lapping of waves against the shore. I had worked in high-stress environments my entire career. Deadlines, meetings, office politics, and the constant noise of city life had worn me down to nothing. But here at the lake, I could finally breathe again. I could think clearly. I could remember who I was before the corporate world tried to reshape me into something else. The neighborhood seemed perfect too. Quiet, respectful people who valued their privacy as much as I valued mine. Most of the cabins were vacation homes, owned by families who came up on weekends and holidays. During the week, I often had the entire lake to myself. It was exactly what I had been searching for. I spent my days fishing from the dock, reading books in the hammock I had strung between 2 massive oak trees, and working on small improvement projects around the cabin. Nothing major, just the kind of therapeutic manual labor that helped wash away years of sitting behind a desk. I replaced some rotted deck boards, painted the shutters, and cleared walking paths through the woods behind my property. There were a few minor administrative details that came with buying in this community. Something called a homeowners association that maintained the private roads and managed the community dock. I had noticed a few signs posted around the neighborhood about community standards and property maintenance guidelines, but they seemed reasonable enough. Keep your grass cut. Do not leave trash lying around. That sort of basic common sense stuff. The HOA dues were minimal, maybe $50 a month, and I figured it was a small price to pay for living in such a well-maintained community. During my first few weeks, I barely gave it a second thought. I was too busy enjoying my newfound freedom and the peace I had been craving for so long. Looking back now, I should have paid more attention to those signs. I should have read the fine print more carefully. I should have asked more questions about who was running this homeowners association and what kind of power they thought they had over my property. But I was so happy to finally be living my dream that I did not want to look for problems where none seemed to exist. The lake was beautiful. The cabin was perfect. and for the first time in years, I felt genuinely content with my life. That contentment would not last long. She appeared on a Tuesday morning like a storm cloud rolling across a clear sky. I was sitting on my deck, enjoying my second cup of coffee and watching a family of ducks paddle near the shore, when I heard the sharp click of high heels on my gravel driveway. I turned to see a woman marching toward my front door with the determination of a general leading troops into battle. She was probably in her late 50s, with perfectly styled blonde hair that looked like it could survive a hurricane. She wore a crisp white blazer, pressed khaki pants, and carried a thick clipboard pressed against her chest like armor. But it was her expression that made my stomach drop. This was not a friendly neighbor stopping by to introduce herself. This was someone who had come here with a mission, and that mission involved making my life difficult. "Excuse me," she called out in a voice that could cut glass. "Are you the new owner of this property?" I set down my coffee cup and walked over to the deck railing. "Yes, I am. Can I help you with something?" She looked me up and down like I was something unpleasant she had found stuck to her shoe. "I am Karen Mitchell, president of the Crystal Lake Homeowners Association. We need to discuss several violations I have observed on your property." Violations. The word hit me like a slap in the face. I had been living here for 3 weeks, keeping to myself, bothering no one. What violations could I possibly have committed? "I am sorry, what violations are you talking about?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm and reasonable. Karen flipped through several pages on her clipboard with theatrical precision. "First, your garbage cans are visible from the street, which violates Section 12 of our community standards. Second, you have been parking your truck in your driveway instead of the garage, which violates Section 7. Third, I noticed you were grilling after 8 p.m. last Friday, which violates our noise ordinance under Section 15. I stared at her in disbelief. My garbage cans are behind my cabin, barely visible from anywhere. My truck is parked in my own driveway on my own property, and grilling quietly on my deck violates a noise ordinance. Her eyes narrowed. "The community standards are very clear, mister." She looked down at her clipboard. "Mr. Thompson, every homeowner received a copy of these rules with their closing documents. Ignorance is not an excuse." "I read through everything when I bought this place," I said. "I do not remember seeing anything about where I can park my truck or what time I can use my grill." Karen's smile was sharp enough to cut diamonds. "Perhaps you should read more carefully. The Crystal Lake Homeowners Association maintains very high standards for this community. We will not allow these standards to decline because someone cannot be bothered to follow simple rules." She tore off 3 yellow slips from her clipboard and held them out to me. "These are formal violation notices. You have 14 days to correct each issue or face escalating penalties, including daily fines." I took the papers with numb fingers. Each one was covered in dense legal language and reference numbers. Penalties, daily fines, for parking in my driveway. "The rules apply to everyone equally," Karen said. "This community has maintained its property values and reputation by ensuring that every resident follows the same standards. We cannot make exceptions." As she turned to leave, she paused and looked back at me. "I should also mention that I will be conducting regular inspections of your property to ensure ongoing compliance. Have a pleasant day, Mr. Thompson." I watched her march back down my driveway, her heels clicking against the gravel like a countdown timer. My hands were shaking as I looked down at the violation notices. Each one threatened fines starting at $50 per day if the violations were not corrected within 2 weeks. That evening, I walked around the neighborhood, really looking at it for the first time. I noticed how every lawn was perfectly manicured. Every driveway was spotless. Every garbage can was hidden from view. The other homeowners I passed avoided eye contact, hurrying inside their houses like they were afraid of being seen talking to me. It finally hit me what I had gotten myself into. This was not a community. This was a dictatorship, and Karen Mitchell was the dictator. My peaceful lake retreat had become a prison, with rules designed to control every aspect of my life. But I had no idea yet just how far Karen was willing to go to maintain her power. That lesson was still coming. 3 weeks later, I decided I had had enough of living in fear. I had spent my entire adult life working toward this moment, this place, this freedom. I was not going to let some power-hungry HOA president steal it from me with her ridiculous rules and constant threats. So I planned a barbecue. Nothing fancy, just a few friends from work coming up for the weekend to see my new place. We would grill some burgers, drink a few beers, and enjoy the lake like normal human beings. It was my property, my grill, and my right to use them. I spent Friday afternoon preparing everything. I cleaned the grill, set up the picnic table on the deck, and stocked the cooler with drinks. The weather forecast was perfect. Clear skies, low 70s, barely any wind. It was going to be exactly the kind of evening I had dreamed about when I bought this place. My friends arrived around 5 o'clock, and for the first time in weeks, I felt genuinely happy. We sat on the deck, sharing stories and laughing while I seasoned the burgers and got the charcoal ready. The lake was like glass, reflecting the pine trees and the golden afternoon sun. This was what life was supposed to feel like. I fired up the grill at exactly 6:30. The coals were perfect, glowing red-hot with no flames. The first batch of burgers went on with that satisfying sizzle that means everything is going right. My friend Mike was telling a story about his kids, and everyone was relaxed and enjoying themselves. That was when I saw her. Karen was standing at the edge of my property line, about 50 feet away, just watching us. She had that same clipboard pressed against her chest, and even from that distance, I could see the disapproval radiating from her like heat from a fire. "Who is that?" my friend Sarah asked, following my gaze. "The HOA president," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Just ignore her. She will get bored and leave." But Karen did not leave. She stayed there for 20 minutes, writing notes on her clipboard and occasionally taking pictures with her phone. The mood of our gathering shifted from relaxed to tense. My friends kept glancing over at her, and the conversation became forced and uncomfortable. Then she started walking toward us. "Mr. Thompson," she called out in that razor-sharp voice, "I need to speak with you immediately." I set down my spatula and walked to the edge of the deck. "What can I do for you, Karen?" "This gathering violates multiple community standards," she said, waving her clipboard like evidence in a court case. "You are in violation of the noise ordinance, the guest parking restrictions, and the outdoor cooking regulations." "We are having a quiet barbecue on my own property," I said. "What noise ordinance? What guest parking restrictions?" Section 18 clearly states that social gatherings require prior approval from the HOA board. Section 12 prohibits outdoor cooking that produces smoke visible from neighboring properties. And Section 9 limits guest parking to 2 vehicles per household. I looked back at my friends who were all staring at this surreal confrontation. "Karen, this is ridiculous. We are not bothering anyone. We are not making excessive noise. We are just having dinner." Her face turned red with rage. "The rules are not suggestions, Mr. Thompson. They are binding regulations that every homeowner agreed to follow. If you cannot comply with basic community standards, perhaps you should consider living somewhere else. That was when something inside me snapped. Are you threatening me? Are you actually standing on my property, threatening me for having friends over for dinner? I am enforcing the community standards that protect all of our property values, she said. Then she pulled out her phone. Since you refuse to comply voluntarily, I am calling the authorities. My blood turned to ice. You are calling the police on a barbecue. I am reporting illegal activities that violate both HOA regulations and county ordinances, she said, already dialing. Hello, yes. I need to report a disturbance at 4847 Lakeshore Drive. Multiple violations of county noise ordinances and potentially dangerous fire hazards from illegal outdoor cooking. I stood there in complete shock as Karen provided my address to the 911 dispatcher, describing our quiet barbecue like it was a rave that was threatening the safety of the entire neighborhood. My friends were gathering their things, clearly uncomfortable with being caught in the middle of this insanity. I am so sorry, I told them. This is completely crazy. Maybe we should just go, Mike said quietly. We do not want to cause you any trouble. But it was too late for that. In the distance, I could already hear the sirens getting closer. Karen stood there with that smug smile on her face, finally getting to flex the full power of her petty authority. She had won this round and she knew it. 3 police cars pulled into my driveway, their red and blue lights flashing against the trees. I had never been so humiliated in my entire life. My quiet evening with friends had become a crime scene, complete with officers asking questions and taking notes while Karen stood nearby like a prosecuting attorney. As I watched the last police car drive away and my friends pack up their cars to leave, I made a decision that would change everything. This war was no longer about parking spaces and garbage cans. Karen had just made it personal, and I was going to end it. That night, after the police had left and my friends had gone home, I sat in my kitchen with my laptop and a legal pad, seething with anger but channeling it into something productive. Karen thought she had won by humiliating me in front of my friends, but she had actually made a critical mistake. She had shown me exactly how far she was willing to go, which meant I now knew what I was really dealing with. I started with the basics. What exactly was the Crystal Lake Homeowners Association? Who had the authority to create all these rules? How were they enforced? And most importantly, what were the legal limits of their power? I spent hours reading through state HOA laws, legal precedents, and court cases. What I found was fascinating and disturbing. HOAs did have significant power over homeowners, but that power was not unlimited. They had to follow their own governing documents. They had to provide due process. They had to act within the scope of their legal authority. More importantly, they could be dissolved under certain circumstances. I pulled out all my closing documents and read through every page with the intensity of a lawyer preparing for trial. The HOA covenants were there, buried in 50 pages of dense legal language that most people would never read carefully. But as I worked through each section, I started to see cracks in Karen's armor. The Crystal Lake HOA had been established in 1987 when the original developer subdivided the land around the lake. The covenants were supposed to be reviewed and updated every 10 years by a vote of the homeowners. But according to the documents, no such review had taken place since 2003. That was interesting but not necessarily actionable. I kept digging. The HOA was supposed to be governed by a 5-member board of directors, elected by the homeowners every 3 years. But when I looked up the most recent election records, I found something shocking. There had not been an election in over 6 years. Karen had been serving as president for nearly a decade without ever being re-elected. Now we were getting somewhere. I cross-referenced the violation notices Karen had given me with the actual text of the covenants. The parking restrictions she cited were not in the original covenants at all. Neither were the outdoor cooking regulations or most of the other rules she had been enforcing. These were additions that had been made over the years without proper homeowner approval. But the real bombshell came when I started looking into the HOA's financial records. As a homeowner, I had the legal right to inspect these documents, so I submitted a formal request. What I received 3 days later made my jaw drop. The Crystal Lake HOA was collecting dues from 43 homeowners, roughly $2,600 per month, but their expenses were minimal. Road maintenance, insurance, and basic administrative costs totaled less than $800 per month. Where was the rest of the money going? According to the financial records, Karen had been paying herself a monthly administrative fee of $1,200 for the past 4 years. She had also been paying her husband's landscaping company to maintain the community areas at rates that were double the local market rate. This was not just petty tyranny, this was fraud. I documented everything, creating a detailed timeline of Karen's unauthorized rule changes, illegal elections, and financial misconduct. Every violation notice, every threatening letter, every bogus fine was evidence of a pattern of abuse that went far beyond normal HOA authority. But I needed more than just documentation. I needed allies. I started reaching out to other homeowners in the community, carefully and quietly. What I found was a neighborhood living in fear. Karen had been systematically targeting anyone who questioned her authority, drowning them in violation notices and fines until they either complied or moved away. Mrs. Patterson, an elderly widow at the end of our road, had been fined over $3,000 in the past year for landscaping violations because she could not afford to replace her aging fence. The Johnsons, a young couple with twin toddlers, had been cited multiple times for noise violations when their children played in their own backyard. Everyone had a story. Everyone had been bullied. But no one had known how to fight back because Karen controlled all the information and wielded her authority like a weapon. That was about to change. I found a lawyer who specialized in HOA disputes, and what he told me was music to my ears. Based on the evidence I had gathered, the Crystal Lake HOA was operating outside its legal authority in multiple ways. The unauthorized rule changes, the lack of proper elections, and the financial misconduct were all grounds for legal action. But he suggested something even better. Under state law, if an HOA failed to follow its own governing documents or operate within legal parameters, the homeowners could petition to dissolve it entirely. Karen had built her little kingdom on a foundation of illegal actions and fraudulent authority, and I was about to bring the whole thing crashing down. The next phase of my plan required patience and precision. I could not just charge in with accusations and evidence. I needed Karen to make another mistake, something so egregious that even her most loyal supporters would turn against her. Fortunately, I was beginning to understand that patience was not one of Karen's strengths. I started by following every single HOA rule to the letter while carefully documenting each interaction. When Karen sent me violation notices for infractions that did not exist in the actual covenants, I responded with formal written challenges, requesting specific legal citations for each alleged violation. When she threatened fines, I demanded proper hearings with written notice as required by state law. Every time Corinne tried to exercise her authority, I forced her to justify it through proper legal channels. And every time she could not provide that justification because it did not exist. Meanwhile, I was quietly building a coalition of fed-up homeowners. Mrs. Patterson was the first to join my cause after I showed her that the fines she had been paying were completely invalid. The Johnsons came aboard when they learned that the noise ordinance Corinne had been citing to harass their children was something she had made up entirely. One by one, I approached the most victimized homeowners in our community. I shared my research carefully, showing them exactly how Corinne had been operating outside her legal authority. The response was always the same: shock, followed by anger, followed by a burning desire for justice. We formed what we jokingly called the Crystal Lake Liberation Front, meeting quietly at different homes to coordinate our strategy. The plan was simple but effective. We would force Corinne to either admit her authority was illegitimate or double down on her illegal actions until she crossed a line that would destroy her completely. The lawyer I had consulted helped us draft formal complaints about Corinne's unauthorized rule changes and financial misconduct. We submitted these to the state attorney general's office and the county district attorney, creating an official paper trail of her violations. But the real trap was much more personal. I knew Corinne could not resist the opportunity to flex her power, especially when she felt that power was being challenged. So I gave her the perfect target. I announced that I would be hosting another barbecue, this time with proper written notice to all homeowners as required by the legitimate HOA covenants. The invitation was a masterpiece of legal precision. I cited the exact covenant sections that protected my right to reasonable use of my property. I provided documentation showing that none of Corinne's claimed restrictions appeared in the original governing documents, and I invited every homeowner in the community to attend, with copies of all my research available for anyone who wanted to see the truth about how our HOA was being run. Corinne's response was swift and predictable. She sent me a cease and desist order, threatening immediate legal action if I proceeded with my illegal gathering. She claimed emergency authority to prevent dangerous activities that threatened community safety. But this time, I was ready for her. I had a process server standing by to deliver formal notice of our intent to dissolve the HOA, based on the mountain of evidence we had gathered about Corinne's illegal activities. The moment she signed for that document, she would be legally required to call a meeting of all homeowners within 30 days to address our petition. The beauty of this trap was that Corinne could not win no matter what she chose to do. If she tried to stop my barbecue through legal channels, she would have to admit in court that her authority was legitimate, opening herself up to criminal charges for fraud and embezzlement. If she backed down, she would lose face in front of the entire community, and her power would evaporate. But knowing Corinne's personality, I was betting she would choose a third option. She would escalate to an extreme that would finally show everyone exactly what kind of person they had been living under. The barbecue was scheduled for Saturday evening. By Wednesday, I had received support from over half the homeowners in our community. People were not just planning to attend, they were planning to bring documentation of their own experiences with Corinne's abuse of power. Thursday morning, Corinne made her first mistake. She sent violation notices to every homeowner who had publicly supported my barbecue, citing conspiracy to violate community standards as grounds for immediate fines and potential legal action. Friday afternoon, she made her second mistake. She hired a private security company to patrol our neighborhood during the barbecue, claiming authority to arrest trespassers and remove disruptive individuals from community property. But I knew the biggest mistake was still coming. Corinne's ego would not let her simply watch from the sidelines while her authority crumbled. She would have to make a grand gesture, something so outrageous that it would finally give me everything I needed to destroy her completely. All I had to do was wait. Saturday evening arrived with perfect weather and electric tension. By 6 o'clock, over 30 homeowners had gathered on my property, the largest social gathering in Crystal Lake's history. People brought folding chairs, side dishes, and most importantly, thick folders of documentation showing years of Corinne's illegal actions. The mood was part celebration, part revolution. Neighbors who had been afraid to speak to each other for years were finally sharing their stories. Mrs. Patterson had brought records showing over $5,000 in invalid fines. The Martinez family had documentation of Corinne's attempts to foreclose on their cabin over a dispute about their mailbox color. Everyone had evidence of the same pattern: arbitrary rules, excessive fines, and constant threats. I had set up a table with copies of all my research about the HOA's illegal operations. The original covenants, the missing election records, the financial documents showing Corinne's embezzlement, everything organized in clear, easy-to-understand packets. People were taking copies, reading through them, and getting angrier by the minute. "I cannot believe she has been stealing from us for years," said Tom Johnson, looking at the financial records. $1,200 a month for what? Sending threatening letters. "Look at this," Mrs. Patterson said, pointing to a section in the original covenants. "It says right here that any rule changes require approval from 60% of homeowners. When did we ever vote on parking restrictions or noise ordinances?" That was when Corinne arrived. She came in like a storm, flanked by 2 private security guards, and carrying a briefcase that probably contained every legal threat she could think of. Her face was red with rage, and she was practically vibrating with fury as she surveyed the crowd gathered on my property. "This illegal assembly ends now," she announced in a voice that could shatter glass. "Everyone needs to disperse immediately or face legal consequences." The crowd turned to look at her, and for a moment nobody said anything. Then something beautiful happened. Instead of scattering in fear like they had for years, people started laughing. "Legal consequences," called out Mike Chen, one of the newer homeowners. "You mean like the legal consequences you are facing for embezzling HOA funds?" Corinne's face went from red to purple. "How dare you make such accusations? I have devoted years of my life to maintaining the standards of this community." "By making up rules that do not exist?" asked Mrs. Patterson, holding up her copy of the original covenants. "By fining people for violations that are not in any legal document?" I stepped forward, holding the process server's papers that would officially begin Corinne's downfall. "Corinne, I think it is time you learned something important about the law. You cannot just make up rules and call them legal. You cannot fine people for violations that do not exist. And you certainly cannot embezzle money from an organization you have no legal authority to run." "I am the duly elected president of this HOA," she snarled, but her voice was shaking now. "Really?" I held up the election records. "Because according to these documents, there has not been an election in over 6 years. Your term expired in 2018. You have been operating with no legal authority whatsoever." The crowd was dead silent now, watching this confrontation unfold like a tennis match. Even Corinne's security guards looked uncomfortable, probably realizing they had been hired to intimidate people by someone with no actual authority. Corinne opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of papers. "I have ceased and desist orders for every person at this gathering. I have violation notices that will result in immediate fines. I have the authority to have all of you arrested for trespassing." "No, you do not." I handed her the dissolution petition, signed by over half the homeowners in our community. "What you have is a federal investigation into your financial crimes, a state attorney general inquiry into your unauthorized rulemaking, and about 30 witnesses to your attempts to intimidate people through illegal means." Karen stared at the papers in her hands like they were written in a foreign language. For the first time since I had met her, she looked genuinely confused and afraid. "This is impossible," she whispered. "I built this community. I maintained the standards. I protected everyone's property values. You terrorized innocent people for your own ego and profit," said Tom Johnson. "You turned our neighborhood into a police state and stole our money while doing it." The security guards were already walking back to their car, apparently deciding this was not worth whatever Karen was paying them. Several people in the crowd were taking pictures and videos of the confrontation, documenting Karen's final moments of attempted authority. I looked directly at Karen, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and pity. "Your reign of terror is over. The HOA is being dissolved. Your authority is gone. And if I were you, I would be much more worried about the criminal charges than about anyone's barbecue schedule." Karen's clipboard fell from her hands, scattering papers across my lawn. For years, that clipboard had been her weapon, her symbol of power, her tool for controlling and intimidating everyone around her. Now it was just trash blowing in the wind. She looked around at the crowd of homeowners, searching for any sign of support or sympathy. She found nothing but the cold satisfaction of people who had finally seen justice served. Without another word, Corinne turned and walked back to her car, her empire of petty tyranny crumbling behind her with every step. 3 months later, I was sitting on my dock at sunrise, coffee in hand, watching the mist rise off Crystal Lake. The silence was perfect. Not the tense, fearful silence of a community living under tyranny, but the peaceful quiet of people who could finally enjoy their homes without constantly looking over their shoulders. The Crystal Lake Homeowners Association had been officially dissolved 6 weeks earlier. The vote was unanimous among all eligible homeowners, which turned out to be everyone except Karen. Her membership had been revoked when the investigation revealed the full scope of her financial crimes and unauthorized actions. The state attorney general's office had filed charges against Karen for embezzlement, fraud, and conspiracy. Her husband's landscaping company was also under investigation for the overpriced contracts that had drained thousands of dollars from the HOA coffers. The money she had stolen was being recovered through asset seizure, and every homeowner would receive restitution for the invalid fines they had paid over the years. Karen herself had moved away 2 weeks after our confrontation, putting her house up for sale and disappearing from our community as quickly as she had once dominated it. The for sale sign in her yard had become something of a local landmark, a symbol of what happens when petty tyrants finally meet their match. The transformation in our neighborhood had been remarkable. Without Karen's constant threats and arbitrary rules, people were actually talking to each other again. Children were playing in their yards without fear of noise violations. Homeowners were making improvements to their properties based on their own preferences rather than the whims of a dictator with a clipboard. Mrs. Patterson had planted a beautiful flower garden where her old fence used to be, using some of the restitution money she received from Karen's embezzlement. The Johnsons had installed a swing set for their twins, and their laughter could be heard across the lake on quiet evenings. Tom Chen had started a weekly poker game that rotated between different houses, something that would have been impossible under Corinne's reign. As for me, I finally had the peaceful retreat I had worked so hard to achieve. My barbecue grill saw regular use, hosting neighbors and friends without fear of 911 calls or violation notices. I had learned to fish the deeper parts of the lake, discovered hiking trails through the woods behind my property, and even started a small vegetable garden that would have given Corinne nightmares about property value degradation. But the most satisfying change was the simplest one. I could sit on my deck in the evening, listening to the sound of families enjoying their homes, without waiting for Corinne's sharp heels on gravel or her razor voice cutting through the peace. The constant stress of living under surveillance was gone, replaced by the contentment I had originally come here to find. Sometimes bullies seem so powerful that fighting back feels impossible. They have authority, they have systems in place, they have weapons like rules and regulations and legal threats. But every bully has weaknesses, and every system can be challenged by someone determined enough to find the truth. Corinne thought she owned our neighborhood, but she had forgotten a fundamental principle. Real authority comes from consent, not fear. The moment people stopped being afraid of her threats and started questioning her power, her entire empire collapsed like a house of cards. Justice is not always swift, but when it comes, it is absolutely worth the wait.